In this video, I'm going to show you how to sharpen a chainsaw chain using the dual sharpener from Still. I'll just take it out of the box. On this file, you've got the main file, which is the round file that'll sharpen the tooth. Then you've also got the flat file. So, when you sharpen the tooth, you're also knocking down the depth gauge, and this file makes sure that the depth gauge and the tooth are in symmetry, because if you take the depth gauge down too far, what you get is the teeth are taking too much or trying to take too much wood off at once. And then if you see the depth gauge here, it's just in front of the tooth, and then the tooth here. And if you take the depth gauge down too far, they can get grabby and it sticks a lot in the wood as it's cutting, and then you've got to cut everything on absolute full revs to get it through. So what this is good for is it makes sure that the depth gauge is a good height weight, the right height, so the chain cuts correctly. And on the tool itself, there's a diagram. I don't know if you can see that. So it's foolproof, so you can't really get it wrong, and it gets the angles right as well. So what we'll do is we'll just get this saw secured in the vise before we just lift that up a bit. Actually, before we do anything, always put gloves on when you're doing this, because if you slip, you might cut yourself. Right, so we'll just get this saw secured in the vise before we do anything else. Right, so chain break off, there we go. Chain moves freely in the vise. So what I tend to do if I'm doing this is I will always start on the chain somewhere. I mean, for instance, this chain has a gold link when I've made the chain, because I make them off a loop. I always put a gold link in, and then I'll start from the gold link, work round. When I get back, I know I've got back to the beginning on this side, and then I'll do the same on the opposite side. So now, on the tool there's a picture of a chainsaw, and what you do is the picture of the chainsaw and the arrow, it tells you which way to go. And then when you put the tool onto the saw, if you put it on the wrong way, you see the angles don't match up going that way. So it's pretty foolproof. There's the picture of the saw, and there's the arrow, so we need to go that way on this side. So we start just in front of the gold tooth. And this chain's, this is its first sharpen from Sharp. So I've cut a lot of logs. I haven't hit any nails or stones, so the teeth are still in good shape, but they've dulled off. So we're just going to sharpen it. So you just put it on like so, and then just push through, just like that. And as you can see, that one nice and shiny again, and the top of the depth gauge is shiny, meaning that the flat file's hitting the depth gauge, and the file for the tooth is hitting the tooth lovely. And that's all you need to do, about 3 passes on each tooth. If the chain's a lot duller, then maybe it's more than 3 passes. You've got to make sure that however many strokes you're doing on these teeth, that you do it on the opposite side as well, because if you get some of the teeth, if the teeth on this side are shorter than the teeth on this side, the saw, when it cuts, it'll drift in the wood to one side. That's the importance, to make sure that the distance on this tooth from the corner to the cutting edge, on this tooth on this side, corner to the cutting edge, that size has got to be the same as that size. Otherwise, the chainsaw drifts in the wood. And sometimes, if you notice, if you look at a piece of wood that's been cut, a log, it looks like the saw's come down and drifted off. That's because the teeth on one side of the chain are bigger. So we'll just keep going as we were. I'm just doing the three passes on each tooth, like I say, because it's not majorly blunt, but it's just dulled off a bit. This chainsaw as well, it's only got a 15-inch guide bar on, and there we go, you see, we're back to the beginning. There's your gold link, and there's the tooth I started on. So now we know all the teeth on this side have been sharpened. Okay, so as you can see, I've turned the saw around the other way so we can get the other side of the chain, and here's a closer look at the file. So on this side, you can see it's got the size of the file, the pitch of the chain, and it says made in Germany because it's a product made by a well-known company. Right, so starting from this side, if you can see on here, you probably can't see, but there's the gold link is here on the chain. So what we will do is I'll get to the gold link and I'll start the tooth just in front of the gold link. So we are now running it from this side to that side, like so. Sometimes that first pass is difficult because the tooth's just a bit bent over. Don't forget your gloves, like I just did. So we'll go this way. You can get, like I say, the first pass, they do get a bit sticky. So if you're going to do 3 passes on each tooth, maybe the first pass is not counted because you're just knocking a few burrs off before it gets smooth. I would suggest when you do use this type of file to secure the saw the best you can in a vise, if you can, just purely because if you can use it with 2 hands, it makes it more effective because you've got to press down and push along at the same time. I mean, you can use it with 1 hand, just holding the saw, but it won't be as effective because you're not putting the right pressure on that's needed to sharpen the saw. And there's the gold tooth coming up, so I know I've got just a couple more to do on this side. And there we are, that's the last tooth in front of the gold drive link. There we go, and there's a gold link. So that saw is now sharpened. So what I would suggest to do now that the saw's been sharpened is to tension the chain. Because when you get a new chain, they do stretch when you use them for the first time. And it's good practice to always make sure that your chain's sharp and tensioned up before you use it. So if you look at this chain, you shouldn't be able to see any drive links when it's just sat, but you can see the gaps in the bottom of the chain and you can see it's slack there. You must keep it tight to the point where you can lift it up and see about 3 of the drive links, but not the very bottoms, and the chain shouldn't hang slack. If the chain's too slack, it comes round the bar and it'll whip this part of the nose of the bar, and you'll see some bars wear away here, and that's because they've been running it with the chain too slack. So we'll go ahead and just tension this up. It's pretty easy to tension. Just make sure the chain breaks off so the chain can move freely, and then you just undo the 2 side nuts on the case. So that's one, and you don't have to loosen them right off, you just have to loosen them a little bit. There we go, that was tight. So that's loosened off now, and then this screw here will tension the chain. So probably will need half a turn, and already you can feel that's tighter. So I'll go ahead and tighten it up, tighten the 2 nuts up on the side. So I just put the saw down there to give them a good tighten. Just make sure they're tight enough so that they don't loosen off themselves when you're running the saw. Right, now, so if you look at this chain now, when you pull it up, you can just almost see the bottom of them teeth, and that's pulling it up. And there's no slack at all on the bottom. The chain doesn't freely hang slack. That's what you want. If the chain's just freely hanging slack, it needs tightening. That's fine. You can still move it with your hand. If you can't move it with your hand like that, it's far too tight. But it can't be hanging down at the bottom either. There, chain brake back on, and that's that saw sharpened, chain tensioned. How to clean the air filter on a chainsaw. So the first thing you need to do is to undo your clips that hold the plastic body in place at the top. The clips are just on the side. And then your body top cover just come off like that. See how there's some certain areas where the sawdust will gather inside the top. You can just get a paintbrush that you've never used, clean all them areas out. And then this is your air filter at the back here. What you need to do is just undo the clip. It's easy, just put a screwdriver in there, push the clip back. And if you're ever going to take your air filter off, always apply the choke on the saw. So just pull that out. And there's your air filter. As you can see, there's just certain areas, there's a bit of sawdust here, and there's a bit of sawdust here and down the edges, and it's not actually too bad. The top cover, there's not a great deal on there. So I'll just give that a quick clean out. And I've just tapped that on the bench, basically, like so, to get the residue out of it, fine dust. And then you can just use an airline, give it a quick blowout. And then if you put it in some pure petrol, make sure the petrol doesn't have, it's not a mixed petrol, it doesn't have any oil in it, just pure petrol, and just leave it to dry. And that will generally give it a good clean out. And then any stuff you can see around the entrance of your air filter, always make sure you clean that back. Just like so. And then what I would suggest, when you put the air filter back on, just get the airline in and around where the carburetor is. Don't do it when the air filter's off, because you could blow dust into the carb, and we don't want that. So that just goes back on there like so. Let's have a look. There we go. Just slots back in place like that. And then the plastic clip, you just push it. You hear it snap clip. Once that's snapped clip home, you know it's on. Just give it the little wiggle test. Yep, that's not moving. And then go ahead and refit your top cover now. Once you give it a clean out, put it back on, but there's not a lot in there. So, yes. So once you've done that, put your top cover back on the saw, and you do so by, it just fits back into place. You just have to wiggle it around your choke handle just to make sure it's in place. Before you even try and fasten the clips shut, just make sure that it all lines up straight, because sometimes it'll be on this end but it won't be on at the front, and if you push the clip too hard they can snap because they're only plastic. On some of the chainsaws, different brand saws, they don't have plastic clips, they have screws. But again, however your top cover's fastened on, there we go. Just make sure that it's home all the way around before you try and force the clips or the screws in, because you can either, especially with the plastic, if it's got screws into plastic, it's very easy to cross-thread a screw. So if it's not sat right and you're trying to force a screw in, you can easily cross-thread it, and then once you've cross-threaded that section, you can never get another screw in it. But that's why these clips on these saws are very, very good. I really do like them, and they're supposed to be toolless. You're supposed to just be able to pull them down with your hands, but good luck getting your fingers into that one. So I just use the combi screwdriver, and they just pop out just like so, like so. And that's that. So we'll just fasten them back up again, and that's the top cover back on. So that saw's had the air filter cleaned, the chain sharpened and tensioned. So that saw's now ready to go back to work. We're going to take a closer look at the dual sharpener. This is a chain sharpener made by a popular brand. There is other companies that make them. They are very good because what they do here is, in the middle you've got the flat file that sharpens, doesn't sharpen, it reduces the height of the depth gauges. So your depth gauge on here is at the front of the tooth, just there. If you see it sticking up just in front of the tooth, here, that's your depth gauge. So the flat file reduces the height of that, because if you look at the profile of a tooth, they actually go backwards. So the height comes down as the tooth gets smaller. So if you were just sharpening the tooth, eventually what would happen, the tooth would be lower than the depth gauge, and then the only thing touching the wood would be the depth gauges. That's why you must sharpen in tandem the tooth and the depth gauge together. That way the gap between the top of the tooth and the depth gauge is always the same. Then your cutting will be more efficient. If you're just sharpening the tooth only and then you're sharpening, reducing the depth gauge with a flat file, you're not going to be consistent with the height between the depth gauge on this tooth and this tooth. Regardless of how many strokes and this, that and t'other, there will be along this chain, it won't be consistent. And then your saw's not running efficient. It's not cutting the wood efficient, and it's a knock-on effect. So always use a dual sharpener. That way you know that this depth gauge is always the right height, just below the height of the tooth. So this leading edge on this tooth here should always be a little bit higher than this depth gauge. So as you can see here, you've got the two silver bars. These are your guide bars, and they sit on top of the tooth. And you've got two on each side, so you've got two there, two there. Then you have your round files, one's there, one's there, and in the middle you've got your flat file. So this flat file knocks down that depth gauge. This circular file sharpens the tooth. So you've got the same on each side. So this circular file and these two bars do one side, and then this bar and this bar and this circular file do the other side. But you have to do one side at once, then you turn the saw around and flip the file over and do the other side. And that is how you use the dual sharpener.